Now, without further ado, I'd like to invite Harris Gao from Sheppard Mullin to talk about sanctions, export controls, and CFIUS. Hello, Harris. Just a quick introduction. Harris Gao is a registered U.S. patent attorney with a track record in international IP litigation and technology transactions. And he's particularly active in assisting Chinese companies and investors in strategic investments and critical technology acquisition. Good to see you, Harris. The stage is yours. Please go ahead and share your screen if you like.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks everyone for taking your time to spend the time with us this afternoon. My name is Harris Gao, and hello everyone. I'm partner of Sheppard Mullin's Shanghai office, and I have been in Shanghai for the past 12 years. Before that, I practiced law in New York City, so my main focus has been in international patent litigation and technology transfers. But as you guys might expect, in the past couple of years, U.S. regulatory issue is increasingly becoming important for Asian companies, for technology companies, for obvious reasons, for financial companies, also, for obvious reasons. So today, I would like to, kind of go through, some of the more important regulatory issues for technology companies. And in particular, I want to discuss a little bit about, the Biden administration's first year, because, it's almost, it feels almost, 2021 is almost over. And I would say that at least myself, I'm cautiously optimistic that the coming year will be better than what we had. So I would like to discuss today's agenda. We are going to talk about the macro and the macro and micro trends, which is the trends in U.S.-China relations, and how that would affect companies in Asia. Then I am going to talk a little bit about export control, and in particular, it's fair to say today U.S. technology export regime is designed for one purpose, which is maintain its dominance over China. The second topic is I'm going to talk about investment-related issues, in particular CFIUS. And those of you who are in the financial and investment community knows how difficult it is to invest, for Chinese-related capitals to invest in U.S. technology companies. So I'm going to touch on that. Then the third topic is, sanctions and geopolitics and how that affect, in particular, financial companies in Asia. Then the last topic is a little bit unconventional. I'm going to talk about trade secrets. In particular, how trade secrets, fit fits the overall U.S. regulatory issues. Because as you might know, traditionally, trade secrets is not a U.S. government or regulatory issues, but is mostly civil and private issues. But in these days, it's increasingly becoming a U.S. regulatory issue. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and ways for companies to make sure they are, in compliance with relevant issues. So we have reserved the time to answer any questions at the end of today's discussion, but feel free to send any questions during the presentation. And one of the things I want to remind everyone is, given the limitation of time, we are not going to discuss a lot of details in any of the issue we discussed. In particular, I probably will not be able to get into the technical details of any U.S. regulations. So if you have questions, really detailed questions, feel free to email me at the end of the session, and I would be happy to reply one-on-one. Okay, now what are the large trends, in the last several years? First, as everyone can expect, COVID-19 dominated, the world stage for the past 2 years. But now I think everyone is quite optimistic. Things are getting better. In particular, in the last couple of months, I think the case number in the U.S., start to go down substantially. Even though some say, they go down without any reasons, any apparent reasons. So that is, a major background. And the second major trend for U.S. policy is basically the Biden administration is start to, at least in talks, they want to have more engagement with allies, in particular European allies. But as you might heard from the recent incident, with France, this is not necessarily a smooth process. The third one is basically, the United States, the Biden administration continues Trump's adversarial posture with China. But I would say, on a micro level, the Biden administration might be slightly less aggressive, and it has a little bit of a different focus. It tends to focus on human rights more than other matters. And the end result is maybe there will be more engagement. So that's why I'm cautiously optimistic. Things will get better, but whether things will actually get better, that still remains to be seen. And I think for Asian companies, everyone just need to really pay attention to regulatory issues to make sure they are not, get tangled in this, major power struggle to the extent that's possible. So now we are going to talk about the technology export control, and what we call is the China divide. The reason it is called China divide is because I think the primary objective of the U.S. technology export control regime is basically sees China as a strategic adversary, or at least a strategic competitor. I think maybe recently, the focus on competitor is a little bit more, but I think fundamentally, China is seen as a strategic adversary, which is a very significant thing. In fact, in a number of official U.S. documents, China is specifically identified as an adversary. So I think this is very, important, and it's unlikely to change, at least in the short term. And the objective, the strategic objective of the U.S. policy is to maintain its technological dominance. In this regard, many of you might have heard recently, a former top government official at Pentagon recently resigned. And after his resignation, he gave his reason for his resignation is because he thinks that the U.S. is losing he thinks the U.S. is losing its competition with China in artificial intelligence. Regardless, one's view whether U.S. or China is winning on the AI competition, I think the underlying reasoning of his resignation is he views technology dominance is basically an objective of the U.S. Government's policy, and he resigned because he thinks the current U.S. policy or government was not able to win or maintain its dominance in artificial intelligence. So that's all. I think that's all very significant, and that's all unlikely to change in the near future. And when one of our topics, it says U.S. export policy leadership is anti-China. We are essentially talking about top level U.S. officials, including the Republican and Democratic leadership. So in this slide is basically those are some of the recent books by some of more prominent U.S. government officials. Peter Navarro, as many of you know, used to be a top advisor to President Trump. So as you can see from the cover of these two books, they are very dark. So next, we are going to talk a little bit about some of the recent examples. Huawei, as many of you, I think everyone knows, has been a top target. So essentially, because of Huawei, the U.S. government changed its rules regarding, what is considered to diminishes, or the threshold where the U.S. export control would take effect. It used to be 25%, but now it's for Huawei it's 10%. That's one example, and then the TikTok and WeChat ban. Those were action took by the Trump administration. At one time, Trump basically threatened to ban TikTok and WeChat, in the U.S. But since Biden took office, I think these actions have been largely discontinued. Military end users, those are essentially bans against the company who, in U.S.'s view, are active in providing assistance to the Chinese military or the Chinese government. Many of those companies are artificial intelligence companies, like a HiCom Vision, but they also include handset company like Xiaomi, notably. But in this regard, as many of you heard, a couple of months ago, Xiaomi won its fight to basically took it off that list, which is at least which is a very encouraging sign to me, because I actually know Xiaomi for a long time. It is a client since 2010, and its main product is basically phones, smartphones, and televisions. My understanding the situation is some Chinese military personnel purchased some Xiaomi televisions off the internet, And some of those pictures, basically were presented to the U.S. government, and then the Xiaomi was put on the list, and the Xiaomi basically appealed because it says it's just selling phones and televisions to everyone who is willing to buy. It has no control over who the end user is. I think in the end, the U.S. government, wisely took the step, basically cleared the Xiaomi of the list, because I think, in my view, Xiaomi is, a purely 100% civil, civil and private company. So that's one of the more encouraging news I think we have seen this year. But another trend that's kind of worrying is basically the United States government has taken extremely broad jurisdictions. So as I mentioned, for Huawei, the Diminished Rule, essentially anything like contains U.S. technology or made using U.S. technology, could be banned. And that essentially include, all semiconductors, because even for semiconductor products that is purely designed and manufactured, in China, the content of U.S. technology can easily exceed, 10%. As a way of example, all the semiconductor companies, use EDA tools, made by U.S. companies, such as Synopsys, and the value of those could be easily, exceed 10%. In addition, any foundry, for example, Applied Material is a major U.S. semiconductor equipment maker. So their contribution to a final product's value could easily exceed 10%. So that's why, the rules are essentially means any company who wishes to sell semiconductor to Huawei must obtain a U.S. license, government license. Recently we actually did quite a few of those work. For example, we recently obtained some license for headphones. It's even if your product is only for cell phones, handsets. If the chip is, and even if the chip is totally made and designed in China, you need to get a license. Now, obviously, the big question is, will everyone be forced to choose a side between U.S. and China? And I think that's certainly something no one wants to see. But I think that will be the ultimate question. Okay, we are going to talk about the next topic, which is the CFIUS and investment controls. In this regard, here we are. I'm going to basically talk about two things. One is so-called CCMC. So it's essentially it's called Chinese Communist Military Companies. And the current rule is basically no U.S. investment in its security, derivatives, or related products. So one of the example is basically one of the major network operator in China. They were recently forced to exit the U.S. capital market. So this is this rule essentially shut certain Chinese companies, mostly state-owned companies, out of the U.S. capital market. Now, there's a regular CFIUS, enforcement, which basically means that if a Chinese company is going to invest in a U.S. company, and the U.S. company's business is in the so-called TID businesses, which means technology, infrastructure, and personal data, there is a requirement for such acquisition to be reviewed by the CFIUS. And I think, if a filing is required, and I think most people, in the legal community or the business community now understand, if a review is proceeded, the chance of such a deal being approved is really remote. In fact, I cannot recall a single deal that's been approved recently. I understand currently there is a Korea semiconductor company. They are in the process of being acquired by some fund in China, and the technology at issue is not necessarily very advanced, but it is in the semiconductor space, maybe we should call that encouraging, because at the end of its review period, the company was recently was asked to provide additional data, and the review period was extended, so it has not been declined yet. But if history is any guide, I think you probably do not want to bet on that acquisition of U.S. technology company will happen, in the coming years. Yeah. So regarding CFIUS enforcement, there was a Wall Street Journal article. Early on, it has been a very sleepy in the sheriff's office. Now it's very busy. And they are very actively looking for information. They are not, the CFIUS team, now they are not merely waiting for companies to report and review their filings. They are actually actively monitoring, the market to see if there's any action that it may want to block. If there's no other questions, I'm going to talk about sanctions and geopolitics. So export control essentially controls technology. So is CFIUS review. They are directed to parties who owns certain technologies, mostly U.S. made technologies. But sanctions are different. They are directly to certain parties that the U.S. deemed to be essentially adversary. So the most important sanction in the past decade also is Iran. And as everyone knows, Trump pulled out the deal that a number of countries entered with Iran, and then after Biden took office, I think their conclusion is basically the policy adopted by the Trump administration, which is basically so-called maximum pressure, has failed. And the Biden administration has indicated its willingness to rejoin the Iran nuclear agreement. And if this does happen, I think that will be hugely beneficial for European and Asian companies. But on the other hand, you have to caution, even though this is the position that Biden indicated when he took office. So far, I have not seen any concrete step or concrete progress being made. So this is still going to be difficult. Russia, it's kind of the same old, I would say. Biden continues its tough on Russia stance, and it focuses on certain individuals, and Ukraine is recently the Ukraine president met with Biden. So in this regard, we believe a possible focus is on banking. But on the other hand, we do not see Biden is increasing its sanction on Russia. So essentially, there's not much change in this regard. North Korea is an interesting story because, Trump, had a meeting with Kim, and I think now it's fair to say the U.S. is returning to its past approach, which is basically to contain North Korea, not necessarily trying to get rid of its nuclear weapons. So what that is being called is basically incremental denuclearization. But as you may know, this process has taken place, over a couple of decades already. Currently, they're working level talks. They are enforcement's interest in payments, banks related issues. But again, we have not seen huge amount of increased activity in this regard. Cuba and Venezuela. So again, this is one area we think it's unlikely to change course. And one of the reasons is basically Florida, because Florida is very important. And I think the Democrats recently, they have been out of reach in Florida. So I think they probably would not want to continue to alienate the voters in Florida. I guess I should add, with respect to China, recently there have been increased activities, particularly with respect to Xinjiang region, Xinjiang, Tibet, including the forced labor issue for cottons produced. So that is, one of the areas that the Biden administration was more aggressive than Trump. But at least recently, it seems like that things quiet down a little bit. Okay, now I am going to talk about something that's dear and near to my heart, which is trade secrets. Because I think trade secrets is very important, and it is essentially the heart of technology. In the past, trade secrets are mostly viewed as a civil matter between private companies, and the focus is on high damages in U.S. civil litigations. As many of you may have heard, TSMC was SMIC. That was a very important civil case, but that is purely civil litigation between two private companies. In the past several years, in terms of trade secrets, it has been increasingly being federalized, which means, for the same trade secret issues, one can litigate in federal courts. In addition, the U.S. government has been particularly aggressive in trying to enforce trade secret issues. one of the most notable incidents, or one of the most notable battles, I would say. I think we can call it battles between U.S. and China during the trade and technology war, is the case against Fujian Jinhua, which is a DRAM, which is a company founded by the Chinese, the local government of Fujian province, and this company entered a joint development agreement with a Taiwanese company, and based on allegation made by the U.S. government, it appears the Taiwanese government company actually got some have certain employees, stolen certain trade secrets from a U.S. company, Micron. So as a result, Fujian Jinhua had civil litigation with Micron, and when Micron was, well, okay, let's put it that way. When the result of the private litigation does not satisfy either party, the U.S. government getting involved, and it imposed a sanction against Fujian Jinhua and put it on the entity list, which effectively killed its business. So that is the first time the U.S. government used trade secret as a basis for imposing sanction against a private company. And that certainly, make trade secret much more important for any technology companies, and it makes a trade secret, a U.S. regulatory issue. Today, I'm not going to talk too much about what is a trade secret. I think everyone knows what is a trade secret. But I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the issues companies need to be aware of. And the most important thing in terms of safeguarding trade secrets is to focus on employees, particularly on employees joining the company or leaving the companies. And this should be enforced on a regular basis. It should become a policy, company car policy. So, for example, we think, if a company wish to prevent trade secret related issues, employees should not possess any electronic documents containing proprietary information on personal device or emails. And employees should not disclose any confidential information of their prior employees. So if you hire a new employee, make sure that new employee will not bring in any confidential information of his prior employee. And the best way to do that is, if you have an effective system that would prevent the employee from bring his personal computer or personal storage device and upload those documents into your system. Now, I am going to talk a little bit, a typical trade secret case, and in my view, what would be the best defense? For the most part, the plaintiff often view its case based on circumstantial evidence. And there are essentially two types. First is basically, you defendant hide employees away from plaintiff. You have a couple of employees who left company A and joined company B. And then a couple of months later, company B produced a product that's very similar to company A's product. these two are the most common fact patterns. Obviously, some of the more notorious case, you have direct evidence of misappropriation. For those cases, I think there's really nothing you can do. If there's direct evidence of misappropriation, I think you better think of settlement or other things. But most of the cases are built on circumstantial evidence. In those cases are very hard to win in China, but they are very easy. It's very easy for a plaintiff to bring those cases in the U.S. And it's very difficult or even impossible for defendants to defend those cases, because in those cases, the plaintiff essentially said, they built a circumstantial evidence case. And how can a defendant prove that it did not appropriate the trade secrets? That's always very difficult, because how can you prove a negative? I didn't do it. Especially there's circumstantial evidence suggesting certain employee might did it. So in this regard, what we have been advising clients and is in those cases, do not try to prove that you didn't do. Prove what you did do, which is that you try to prove you have independently developed your own technology or product. And the most important reason is, in trying to prove that, you are in complete control of evidence because you know what you did. And, it doesn't really matter what trade secrets are asserted. If you can say the product I sell today, I have evidence to show that I developed everything myself or licensed the technology from third party. That is a very effective defense against trade secret allegations. And once you prove that you develop the product yourself, you would shift the burden of proof to the plaintiff. Now the plaintiff has to prove, you did not independently develop the product. That's going to be very difficult for the plaintiff to do. In the US, there are very robust case law supporting this conclusion. And one of the most important cases is Raytheon versus Indigo. The background of the case, many of you might know, these are two semiconductor companies. In 2007, Raytheon filed a suit against Indigo and alleging trade secrets misappropriation. Indigo was formed by 5 former Raytheon employees. And the trial began in 2014. And Raytheon basically contended Indigo misappropriated 31 trade secrets. But the jury found that Indigo did not misappropriate any of them. And the Federal Circuit affirmed this judgment. Most importantly, the Federal Circuit found that Indigo proved that it has independently developed 2 trade secrets at issue. I'm just going to briefly discuss, some of the relevant evidence. And in this case, the defendant, the Federal Circuit found, there was ample evidence that the defendant employee developed its recipe through the use of general knowledge about baking, about vacuum baking, and consulted with vendors and did experiments. One of the evidence being cited is the testimony of one of the employees. And he testified, he learned about this vacuum technology during his time at another company. And he used the basic parameters of those from textbooks. Then he testified that he used, he did a fair amount of experimentation, and that's how he got the final results. One of the defendant's employee testified, they did several months of experimentation, and they were able to produce those documents. So essentially, in this case, the defendant was able to produce evidence regarding how its technology was developed. For example, where the original technology came from, which is mostly came from other companies, textbook, and vendors. Then they produce evidence regarding its own experimentations. When these evidence was combined, they were able to convince the jury that they independently developed its technology, and they were able to defeat the claim of trade secret misappropriation. So how can one prove, one independently developed its own technology? The key to this defense is independent. So in order to do that, you need to create documentation, and you need to maintain these documentation. And these documents need to tell the story of who, what, when, and where the technology is developed. For example, each technology must have its origin, right? So, where is the starting point of your technology development? In addition, you need to show that you have spent, an appropriate amount of resources in the technology development. For example, if other companies spent 3 years in developing a similar technology, the fact that you only spent 3 months in developing a similar technology probably is not going to do you well. But on the other hand, if you have evidence to show that you actually spent about 2 years in developing similar technology, that could be highly relevant. So in this regard, a company needs to have a strong document retention policy. When we say document retention policy, essentially what we are talking about is basically the company need to maintain and keep certain documents, particularly documents that tend to show that the company will independently develop its technology. And here are some example of good evidence. Patent, copyright application, lab notebooks, whether it's physical or electronic, and witness the invention disclosure form. So essentially, those are documents you talk about an idea you may have and how you achieve that. Or another way is basically it's discuss a technical problem and discuss how you resolve that problem. Version control the source code. If the technology is embodied in source code, if you have complete copy of the source code, and they have versions, they have dates when such source code is written. That will be hugely important. Version control the user-created documents. Hopefully, they are in a good document management system. Physical prototype, product sample, those are all very useful. Emails with attachment. So, for example, if you obtain a certain material or information from a vendor, a third-party vendor, or from, or if you license certain technology, from a third party, those are all very good evidence. Bad evidence, what we say is basically electronic documents in shared drives. So the problem with that is, it is hard to know who used those documents, created documents, when they were created, and who was used. If documents has no version control, that's not very good. And what we call ugly is basically documents without date and author, or paper documents, sit in boxes. The takeaway regarding the trade secrets is, allegation of trade secret misappropriation must be taken extremely seriously, and proper measures should be taken to ensure no employee is using trade secrets of its former employees. And preserving evidence of independent development is the best defense against potential trade secret claims. Okay, I think that's it for me. If there's any questions, feel free to fire away. Rob?
Sorry, hi, Harris. Okay, that was a great presentation. Thank you very much for that. We did have a question come in, and it was in the chat box. So I'll probably read it out to you, Harris, and see if you can take that question on. How effective as a tool is bringing action for breach of confidentiality obligation in the employment contract against employees in China? So are there any practical steps and tactics that you suggest also effective in China, or if you have any experience to share?
Okay. I understand, most of the audience are in Hong Kong. And in this regard, I think Hong Kong has, so what we typically advise to the clients is make sure you have a Hong Kong arbitration clause, in your agreement with a Chinese company. Because in our experience, having such a Hong Kong arbitration clause would be highly effective. And if we were able to obtain a judgment through the arbitration, then it's much easier to enforce such arbitration award than for you to try to initiate a lawsuit in China. So I think, So I would say, the most important thing you can do is make sure you have arbitration clause with Chinese companies. Obviously, if you do not have such a clause and the contract is basically governed in China, then I guess that's basically, Well, in these days, I think you probably just need to look for very good Chinese local counsel.
Right. Thank you very much. We have just a couple of more questions, but I'm aware of the time. So we have just 2 minutes, Harris, and I'd like to just ask you, what does the past year or so tells you regarding the future of the US-China relationships? Very, very briefly, if you can just touch on that, please.
Yeah, I would say, as I mentioned in the beginning, I think the macro trend is, there's going to be continue to be at least competition between U.S. and China, right? But on a micro level, I see some encouraging signs. I think, as compared to Trump, the Biden administration is, they take the law and evidence much more seriously than what Trump did. So in this regard, I think it's a very encouraging sign. But on the other hand, I think on a macro level, it's going to be continue to be difficult.
Great, thank you so much, Harris. And that's about the time we have for this presentation. So again, thank you very much for taking out the time and answering those questions. Harris, hopefully we'll see you in an in-person event soon. But
okay.
At this point of time, I'd like you to now close your presentation.
All right.
And switch off your webcam and put your microphone on mute.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you.